Good evening. I'm Wab Canoe. I'm Anishinaabe from the Ojibways of Enigaming First Nation in Ontario. Welcome to Eighth Fire. On this show, we're looking at how your people can get along better with my people. Get over it. That's something I hear a lot. And I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, great, another boo-hoo, poor little Indian story. Good news, it's not that. What it is an in-your-face argument for why we all need to get over it, for the sake of the economy, but more importantly, for the sake of the country. It's been 500 years. It's time to fix it. So here comes a story stiffened with straight talk and leavened with laughter.
So for my white friends in the audience, I just don't want you leaving going, wow, that fat Hawaiian was hilarious, so.
Certain comedians take the badness that they've grown up with and figure out a therapeutic way to vent it out.
I am Native, I'm Indigenous, I'm First Nations, I'm Aboriginal, I'm sick or tired of all the political correct crap. You can just call me Caucasianly impaired. Is that better?
My people should be kings. And we were never viewed as that way. We were viewed as a pest.
At the annual Edmonton powwow, Howie, Miller, and his four sons seem a bit out of place. They dance on the edge of Canada's most troubled relationship.
You should go in there and do your own dancing.
Mom, Howie's high school sweetheart Jen Houseman, is white. And Howie, adopted, was essentially brought up white by the Miller family.
There was always a part of me that didn't know where I was from and, who my people were.
And now his son Tyson is asking similar questions.
My oldest son, he moves out to Vancouver, right? He graduated, he goes, I'm gonna move to Vancouver and be an actor, right? So he moves out there. He's there for all of a month, basically, right? Phones me up a month later, says, hey, I did an audition just out of the blue, and I got a part. I was like, well, what is it, right? Would you, like a commercial or something, or is it a theater play? He goes, no, I play Quillaterra, the Twilight movies.
I'm Quillaterra.
You guys want to meet him? You guys want to meet him? Ladies and gentlemen, my oldest son, Tyson Houseman.
Hello, everybody. Hi. How's it going?
How big is the role in the 4 Twilight movies? Well, if you're a tween somewhere in the universe, you've likely drooled over and dreamt about the endlessly pouting wolf pack. All buff, all young, and all Aboriginal.
Yep, finally made the pack.
Welcome to the Edmonton home of a suburban kid made good, made native.
Growing up, I knew absolutely nothing about my identity. My grandparents were white. I heard their stories of their lives and whatever Canadian culture that was. That's really all I had was Canadian culture. There was no specific vibrance of any other culture. There was no Aboriginal culture when I was growing up. So I didn't, I knew that I was Native, but I didn't really understand what that meant. This is a huge opportunity for me to be a role model for Aboriginal youth. I don't really know where we need to go right now, but I know that things aren't right in Canada with all of the Native issues that we have, and for me, this is a huge opportunity to do something about that.
And there's lots to be done, because things sure ain't right when roadways are blocked. Histrionics replace reason.
Arguing with some bozo ain't gonna accomplish nothing.
Fisticuffs are a first resort. Caledonia, Ipperwash, Oka, and countless other clashes have made this relationship look like a face-off. So what went wrong? It wasn't always like this when we started down the path. When the settlers first arrived, the natives welcomed them and helped them out. It wasn't like they showed up and the natives said, uh-oh, there goes the neighborhood. And the relationship grew stronger, fashionable even. Remember these? It's a beaver hat. This was considered cool back in the day. That's right, our rodents were all the rage in 17th century Europe. That led to the fur trade, and of course the fur trade gave us Canada. For a time, The Aboriginal people had this warm and fuzzy feeling, love and understanding. We documented that in wampum belts like this one that depict two canoes traveling down the river in parallel paths, neither one interfering with the other. It's cute, eh? And the English and French, well, for their part, they signed all sorts of big agreements with great seals. Ever since the Royal Proclamation of 1763, there's been banner promises like, the natives will not be molested. Or my personal favorite, the Queen's promise to the Cree of bounty and benevolence. You know, we Aboriginal people thought we were getting a seat at the big table. But it turns out we had a reservation at a much smaller table, out the back, near the garbage cans. At the big table, they got Canada and all of its bounty. At our table, a total lack of benevolence. We got the plague, a plague of whiskey, and our parents and grandparents were molested in schools designed to kill the Indian in the child. So where did all of that go wrong? Well, step into my office, grab a seat on the big couch, and let's talk. At Wanuskewin Heritage Center outside of Saskatoon, a random bunch of folk gather for a little therapy. Among them a steelworker and a retired farmer.
Aboriginals still feel that society owes them.
They hold up their hand for something and it magically comes to them.
We pay for them to live. I mean, what more could they ask for as a society, you know?
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wanuskewin. My name's John Lajimodiere, and I'm going to be speaking with you for the next couple hours about First Nations and Métis issues here in Saskatchewan. My company's called ACS Aboriginal Consulting Services, and it was formed about 14 years ago to go out and work with companies looking to hire and retain Aboriginal people.
It's a daunting task, every day confronting the misconceptions that mire this relationship.
No matter what the crowd is, I'm going to tell them the same thing, and I'm going to deliver it in the same way, and I'm going to be as blunt and honest and truthful as I can, whether it's a pack of priests or a bunch of miners or a bunch of bikers, miners, and priests. Across Canada, 35% of people living on reserve are reliant on welfare.
These sessions might work for bikers, miners, and priests, but what about farmers?
My mother's people were dumped on the shores of Cape Breton in 1799 with nothing. 8 generations later, and as far as I know, nobody ever took welfare.
Different situation, though.
What's the situation?
Came over here. We're talking about an isolated group inside of a community that was put on reserves that were not legally allowed to even leave the reserve, that had administrative people that administrated their bands, that left them perennially poor.
The point John is making is that Robert's ancestors didn't have every detail of their lives prescribed by a special law.
Chapter 32, an act to amend the Indian Act.
The Indian Act of 1876, which still governs life on reserves, held fast to John A. Macdonald's declaration to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian peoples.
Chapter 27, an act further to
Dense with
amend
detail, it at times banned natives from hiring lawyers, banned traditional ceremonies, it even banned natives from pool halls. And in all the crowded text, no room for complaint.
What do? Go to your member of parliament? No, can't vote till 1960. Go to your MLA? Not my issue. Go to your Indian agent? Works for the government. Also, you had to have a permit to sell your cow. If you wanted to go to the neighboring town and sell your crop, you had to get a permit from the Indian agent. They controlled your economy. And if your leader stood up to the government, they could remove the leader. Good God. And this is all legislated stuff.
Okay, we're gonna let them talk for a little bit and we'll come back to them. And talking's good. The Supreme Court has even provided a framework for the discussion. What am I talking about? Well, remember in '82 when Pierre repatriated the Constitution? Section 35 says that Aboriginal and treaty rights are hereby affirmed. And since then, the Supreme Court has stated in numerous cases that if you want to do something on Indian land Aboriginal people have to be consulted and accommodated. It's not a veto, but we have to talk. And here's an example of how that can work to everyone's advantage. Consider the Lilwat. Nobody used to talk to them. Whole resorts were built on their land without a single word. Then, BC decided they wanted to invite the world to Whistler. Today, the mountains seem untouched by the great feats of the 2010 Olympics. But on the ground, the change is remarkable. The Olympics came to Whistler and the local bands gained a voice. For generations, they'd been ignored.
There was no relationship with anybody, I think, prior to the Olympics.
Now Chief Lucinda Phillips of the Lilwat sits in the middle of things. Her people celebrated in a spanking new cultural center in town. And when the world traveled up the Sea to Sky Highway to get to Whistler, they were duly informed they were passing through Aboriginal land. And the recognition has continued.
Relationships and negotiations have, I would say, 75% improved. Acknowledgement, recognition, all of that is happening today.
A relationship lifted by the Olympics continues to make steady progress. The Lilwat got money, land, and jobs for playing host. Now a hydro track is taking Lucinda to another historic meeting.
BC Hydro in the past had no relationships. They would come into our reserve or within our territory. They would build the transmission lines. They would build wooden poles. They would do what they had to do with the infrastructure they had on the ground, but they'd never ever talk to us. They'd never let us know what they're doing. We had no relationship. We had a BC Hydro bill. That was it.
From the early 1900s, BC Hydro laced these mountains with wires, flooded the valleys, and dammed the rivers to make the place hum. The South got power, the locals, culture shock. But today is a new day and a chance to celebrate. Government and hydro officials have come to sign a deal. Lyle Vierick speaks for BC Hydro.
First Nations were very clear that the governments of British Columbia and Canada had not negotiated with them. They had not been defeated in conquest, and that these territories remained theirs.
I'm still waiting for Chief Pat and Chief Perry.
After 100 years, this is the first major agreement that they reached with the Crown. It's a huge milestone in this province, and it's a huge stepping stone for these communities.
Lucinda and the other chiefs are granting Hydro permission to build a new line if required. In return, they are receiving $210 million, promises about employment and training, and contracts. Most of the deal is about past wrongs, but it's also about embracing a new relationship.
You can never put a price on land, language, culture, but I hope that we can be a part of a growing community. I hope for economic development. I hope for unity, even with regard to First Nations and non-First Nations. Yeah, I hope for a lot of things.
The land has always shaped the relationship between Aboriginals and settlers, and for too long, it's had a jagged edge. But the court rulings that give First Nations a say on what happens in their traditional territory gives reason for hope. The truth is, there are a lot of reasons why we need to solve this relationship. In just hard economics, there are $300 billion worth of reasons. That's the estimate of one study on the number of projects in need of consultation. Here's the equation. Asia is booming, and they need our stuff. Timber, minerals, oil, and much of that stuff is in Indian country. For example, the proposal to get Alberta oil to Asia involves a pipeline that passes through the territory of 50 First Nations.
We need to prepare the Quebec of tomorrow.
And here is the official declaration of Quebec fastening its future to an economic blueprint called Plan NAR. Again, much of it on Aboriginal territory. And if $300 billion doesn't do it for you, well, here's at least one more reason why we need to sort this out. Former Prime Minister Paul Martin.
I think this is a tremendously important issue. Many of the First Nations, many Aboriginal Canadians are sitting on a vast storehouse of resources, and we're going to have to consult and deal with them in order to basically be able to develop them. I think that's an important argument, but I believe there's a stronger one, and that is that we are 34 million people. We're in competition with countries like China and India with populations that exceed 1 billion. We cannot afford to waste a single talent. And Aboriginal Canadians are not only the fastest growing, they are the youngest members of our society.
The Pegan kids make the point. The Aboriginal growth rate is almost 6 times that of non-Aboriginals. They live in Regina, and within their lifetime, 1/3 of Saskatchewan's population will be Aboriginal.
Get our pictures done.
Mom.
Our family pictures.
Mommy, do we go get dressed now?
Wash up first.
A lot of talent might have gone to waste just in this house had Mum not dramatically defied her own destiny.
I was abused. I learned how to abuse. You know, it's a cycle.
Vanessa's story was a sorry stereotype. Pregnant at 16, again at 17. Parents alcoholics. A high school dropout with 2 kids in an abusive relationship when she decided it all had to change.
And I said to myself, what are you doing? Your kids are gonna get their grade 12 before you in no time. Like, I said, I can't do that. I told myself, what kind of role model are you, Vanessa? What kind of role model are you for your children?
She shed the abusive partner, finished high school, entered the University of Regina, and is about to graduate with a business degree.
Hey buddy, how's it going? Well, I'm all dirty, but I'm not.
She's been married for 12 years to Justin, and there are now 6 kids.
Cohen, are you dressed?
Today is a bit special. It's picture day for the family. And it's not going to be your average family photo. It's going to have the urban edge that distinguishes the work of artist Nadia Kwandabans.
If you did see First Nations people in the media, it always had a negative vibe, and that got me to thinking there's something I can do as an artist. And I remember one time my dad telling me this nickname for Native people moving into the city. He said they called them concrete Indians. And I thought, hey, that's the name for the series. I scouted this little section here. I think it'd be good because of the stairs, right? Do you like that?
Yeah, I like
graffiti-ish?
that, yeah.
The concepts for each portrait don't actually come from me. They come from the people themselves. We're all adapting, living in an urban setting.
All right, here we go. You guys ready?
And for Vanessa, it's a record of the ground she's gained.
I really believe that where I came from made me the woman that I am today. I'm a strong Aboriginal woman, and I won't let anything stand in my way when I'm determined. I'm here and I'm gonna do something.
And here's her chance. a job fair with a difference.
All the graduates for 115, you're going to be going to your recruiter.
It's called Inclusion Works, and it's a sight unimaginable even just 20 years ago. Hundreds of Aboriginal graduates flowing into Montreal courtesy of corporate Canada. It's cold economics and the new demographics at work, forcing everyone to take a new look at this relationship. Urged on by fire-breathing billionaire Brett Wilson. But what's a former star of the CBC show Dragon's Den doing here?
A dragon came today because he had an opportunity to work with Aboriginal youth. I see the business world as the greatest playground to encourage relationships to be built between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples.
And for the 32-year-old mother of 6, it has been full of surprises.
I never thought it was going to be like this. I was actually, it's probably just workshops, interview skills and this, and I didn't think the interviews were going to be like, when can you start and what's your salary expectations?
By day 3, most of the graduates we talked to had job offers, including Vanessa.
TD Canada just said that if I'm interested, part-time hours when I go back to school in September, I can take part-time because they want to get me going in the bank and get me trained up, ready for the summer.
Increasingly at dinner in Howie's house, Aboriginal issues are part of the menu.
Like, I remember when I was younger and you told us about reserves, and like, I was completely baffled by the idea. It's like, reserves, well, do something about it. That's completely wrong. You don't.
His son Todd is taking Native Studies, and that has spiced up dinner conversation.
But those people didn't go away to the hills. They're still here.
All the boys so far, as they get older, they're just more interested in learning about their history and where they come from.
I'm so extremely happy to be born in Canada. Of all the places in the world, I feel so strongly proud to be Canadian, but at the same time, I don't know what that really means in terms of being Native.
Tonight's discourse, the lack of knowledge that bedevils the relationship.
History classes and social classes in high school and in all grades, they start when colonialism started. Like, they start when people...
It should be taught in all schools. That way people wouldn't grow up as ignorant as some do. I make a joke out of it where I say, we get free cab rides. Oh, they're cop cars. There's always somebody, some young person in the audience who goes, oh, Native people get free cab rides? Oh, they get everything for free. Yeah. Why don't they just go home?
Getting things for free is one of the bugaboos John Lajamodiere takes on in his awareness training.
But first, I want to just get into who pays what taxes and where. I went to rent a car or lease a car when I was a younger man at a major dealership in Saskatoon. The guy came back, showed me the deal. I says, you're missing 2 lines there, GST and PST. He says, you're a Métis guy, you don't pay taxes. I says, we pay every tax, just like everybody else. Very strictly defined hunting right. Other than that, I'm a Canadian citizen, right? I also believe as myself as a Canadian citizen off the start. Anyways, I happen to have Métis status. Now, friends, we have to talk about Indians and status Indians for this, and we're gonna give the Saskatchewan example. But first, let's list 10 taxes. It's fun, come on.
Turns out it's complicated. But in Saskatchewan, unless you work for the band, you pay income tax and corporate tax. You buy stuff off reserve, you pay tax. And some things you buy on reserve that are tax-free, like tobacco and booze, individual bands will levy their own tax. In case you're wondering, I do pay taxes. Property tax, income tax, sales tax. But if I lived on reserve, I might not have to. It all goes back to the deal that we made to share the land. Treaties, remember those? They're an important part of our history. And one of the things that make us different from Americans. In the US, they had the Indian Wars that gave us all those Italians falling off their horses in Hollywood. In Canada, the situation was dramatically different.
Treaties take a different path from that.
John Burroughs is Anishinaabe and a law professor at the University of Victoria.
So there was a big meeting in 1764 in Niagara where representatives of 22 different First Nations came and met with the British Crown. 2,000 people camped at Niagara representing these 22 nations for 2 months, and there they founded Canada.
This, for example, is one of the founding documents. It's a wampum belt that shows the Aboriginal understanding of the Treaty of Niagara. Chains binding together two strong and equal partners.
Canada wasn't just formed through British law alone. It was an intermingling of British law with Indigenous peoples' law. And putting those two sources of law together with the wampum belts, with the agreement, is the foundation of our country, founded on peace, friendship, and respect. It's a story I think we'd love to celebrate.
It's nice and crisp. Thank you very much.
Hey, it still gets celebrated. On Treaty Day, the Mounties come and hand everyone on the res $5. Why? Because that was what was negotiated. Shake the officer's hand, and you get yourself a double-double and a donut. Unfortunately, the chiefs in the 1700s didn't demand indexing for inflation, but they did demand other things.
Treaties were not just a quick one-off. These chiefs had time to get ready. Some had several years to get ready, right? According to stories I was told, Chief Atakakoop and Chief Mistawasis each sent one of their people to Quebec, where they walked around universities and they studied post-secondary education before they negotiated the treaties. So I'm gonna put you folks in a bit of the Indians' moccasins here. Imagine it's 1870, right in this territory here. What do you think they asked of the Crown? And if you can give me 10 things, I will be duly impressed.
Education.
That's right.
They agreed to share the land in return for a few things.
Housing, right? Shelter. They asked for help with shelter.
Among them, housing, healthcare, and
Exactly
education.
what they asked for. And I got to cut right to the chase. The Crown said when it, sorry?
Sorry, that's exactly everything that we took from them. It's everything they asked for.
Exactly. Yeah. We negotiate a treaty with them, and that's oftentimes when the lights go on, hey? When people realize what was agreed on and why and how the process worked, that starts to flip on the lights.
That's because few of the promises have been honored. Statistics on the underfunding of housing and healthcare are as stark as they are lamentable. And on education, well, 30% less will be spent on these kids than on other Canadian children. And it shows.
We underfund Aboriginal education, First Nations education on reserve. We underfund healthcare. We underfund welfare compared to what other Canadians get. Take a look at the facts. And then all I would really say is let's give every single Canadian, whether they be Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, the same funding, with the same quality, and let's see what happens.
Okay, Canada, welcome back. I've been thinking about the occasional bursts of anger, the gnawing in your gut, the sleepless nights. I think there's something in your past that we have to deal with. I know you don't want to go there, but it might help.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to offer an apology to former students of Indian residential schools.
This was a start, a measure of atonement.
Is a sad chapter in our history.
I was watching it at the White Buffalo Youth Lodge in Saskatoon. Stephen Harper comes on, pin drop. Stands up, next thing you hear, sniffles, people crying, people leaving because they can't handle it because of the impact on their families.
I don't buy this that we're the whipping boy all the time. We're not the ones that are at fault here for all of the alleged mistreatment and misunderstanding of First Nations.
I wouldn't say alleged. I would say mistreatment and misunderstanding.
Okay.
And the impact of the Indian residential schools to this day is still in there, right?
We've got to come out of it, and we've got to go forward for the better, the common good.
Hear ya.
We can't be dragging everything behind us all the time.
Gotcha.
I don't think it would be very right to tell a Jewish person to get over it. You know, the Holocaust, get over it, move on. Time to move on, people. You know, you can move on, but it's still part of you. Yeah, it's. I'm sorry, it's not going to be done with until we can start again, and until it's fixed. That's why I'm not going to get over it, because it's not fixed yet.
What we're going to do today is that we're going to talk about residential school, and we've done
A high school class in Port Perry, Ontario gets the straight goods from history teacher Nancy Hammer-Straw.
I think of anything that I teach, any topic that I've ever taught, this one is the most emotionally packed. This is the one that you'll get tears.
It can be a jolt to learn that your government once abducted children from their parents and forced them into special schools. That the official policy was to kill the Indian in the child. That they were shorn of their culture, language, and identity.
Students will go home and tell their parents about this because they didn't know. And their parents probably didn't know.
Didn't know that children their age and much younger were subject to terrible abuse. Were left hungry and alone. This went on from 1870 for over 100 years, for 7 generations.
It was happening while I was growing up. I had no idea. And when you poll a class and ask them how many people knew about this, you get 2 hands up.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say that it was, in fact, in this class that I first heard of it.
Well, for me, it was last year when we started talking about natives, and then Ms. Hammer-Straw introduced us to the residential schools.
You hear about things all over the world that are horrible, but it was so close to us.
It's weird how we've never heard of it before, even though I've taken Canadian history before.
What we're going to do today is I'm going to give you all a set of tiles for the whole class to complete. And remember while you're doing this that these are for children. These are a gift that you're giving the children. Is everybody good with that?
In this class, education is mixed with reconciliation. The students are completing a module called Project of Heart. It involves painting tiles in commemoration of children who died in residential schools, died in the wilderness trying to get home, died of abuse, died of hunger and disease.
The schools were not given the resources to fully implement, better health care for these children. And not only that, they weren't giving them high quality food. So they were starving and they died. It's one of these dark secrets in Canadian history.
That dark secret is now being investigated. Hard to imagine we're in Canada and investigators are searching for the graves of children who never came home.
I don't think we have a sense of how many children went missing, but we do have a sense that it was an unconscionable number. It looks as if most of them are late 30s, early 40s.
Alex Moss and Eldon Yellowhorn are archaeologists. They're inspecting the residential school cemetery in Mission, BC.
We've noticed that this is one of the more unusual headstones.
Yeah. Alex has been hired by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Part of its mandate is to unearth what happened to the missing children.
It's very unusual to have the marbles. I wonder if those marbles belong to the child.
Or to their friends, yeah.
Many lie in unmarked graves in unknown fields.
I imagine that there are a number of children buried here that we don't know about.
A haunting presence is all that remains of the school.
So how old were you when you first came to this school?
I was 7 years old.
7 years old?
Yeah. I think that part was where the shower was.
According to Dolores Adolph, the policy to kill the Indian in the child too often just killed the child.
When we used to get up at night, you know, looking for which way home was, there was 4 people walking this way with a little casket, and they were bringing it into the graveyard because they didn't want anybody to know what was going on. Because there's a lot of babies in here.
Back in Port Perry, the students are finishing their tiles. It's hoped that these and batches from other schools will be put on display by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The project was devised by another teacher, and the number of tiles she gives to each school is deeply symbolic and reflects what we know so far about the number of deaths.
She wanted each school to take ownership of half the population of the school that you're in. So we have 1,200 students here, and so we got 600 tiles. To have a physical representation of the fact that half the students in the residential school would not have made it out of that residential school. So they could actually see, well, if this were my school, half of these people wouldn't be here. So it's pretty powerful. Students need to know about the fact that there are still things that this country needs to work on, that they have a role to play to make things better, and that it's not already done.
A shroud of silence has long settled over Burns Lake in remote northern BC. The railway track cuts through the town, but the real division has long been drawn by racial tension. This logging center with 2 bands in town and a half dozen on its outskirts had no trouble harvesting friction. And as it was dubbed then, Brass Knuckle High was often the arena for settling the score. Drama teacher Ray-Ann Charlie was fresh up from Victoria. She was shocked.
It was almost like apartheid here. It felt like apartheid. It felt like First Nations on one side, non-native on the other side. You walk into an event or to even a restaurant, or you go out dancing. That was where it was the most obvious. Nobody wanted to deal with it. Nobody. It was a simmering pot.
It was simmering with the silences that strain any relationship and that beg to be addressed. For example, for years, nobody spoke about the Chislada, a local band flooded out of their homes at the last moment in 1953 because Alcan needed hydro for their smelter. A people who lived off the land forced onto welfare. The contours of their culture flooded out under 140 feet of water. The spirit houses the Chislada built on top of their graves will forever be emblematic of what went wrong. These days, they place them on high ground, for good reason. The Great Flood couldn't even leave the dead undisturbed. It's a story no longer stranded in silence.
Some of the facts, at least, for instance, about the Chislada story, it's the time now to pull those stories up. To pull the stories up that are all over Canada, that we need to use to enlighten the Canadians, because they don't know the stories. They don't know the truths. And until we do that, and until everybody hears, then it's too easy not to look. It's too easy to stay in denial.
Ray-Ann and others are challenging that denial, and tonight it seems to be working. The many faces of Burns Lake are strikingly evident in the lineup to get into the school auditorium. And this is a first.
Welcome everyone to our first annual Indigenous Festival of the Arts.
It's just too easy to just, oh, eventually it'll all balance out, you know? No way. It's not going to balance out unless we really get together and build networking and bring in people who can help us.
Going, Birdleg. Come on, what are we in a golf game? How's it going? There we go.
You guys are the first Team Quill I've met.
The young movie star offers a new Aboriginal image to a new generation.
I'm going down that road now. I'm doing as much research as I can on the history of Native affairs in Canada and stuff like that. I want to be able to do something important with this.
We're slowly getting there, you know. It's tough, and some generations have had it harder than others, but I think in the future, it's looking up. It's looking better. Thank you very much for having us, Birdleg. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We all have to acknowledge our history, right? And I don't go out and say, this is your fault. This is none of our faults, right? This is what we inherit.
But back in Saskatoon at our therapy session, has anything changed for steelworker Rob Pilon or farmer Robert Gordon?
I'd say that my views and opinions have completely changed.
There was things there I didn't know. I've done quite a bit of research on this type of thing, and there was things there I didn't know about.
We need, as society, to have more programs like this incorporated into our everyday living, as far as maybe in our schools.
Okay, guys, so now what we have to do, we need to put them and pack them in the boxes. We have to send them. Here we go. It's a pretty one. I like
In
that.
terms of this idea of guilt, we should know our history. And our history isn't very pretty here. But I can't answer for what happened 50 years ago. But if my grandchildren ask me what I did in my life in terms of this issue, and there hasn't been an improvement, then I certainly should feel guilt. And I don't want to, and I don't think any Canadian wants to.